You sit before me, perhaps without realizing that something ancient within you has already begun to move, as if a tectonic plate in the psyche has shifted in the dark, preparing the soil of your inner life for a transformation you did not consciously request. I want you to sense, not merely understand, that you are standing at the edge of a psychological threshold, one that your shadow has been preparing quietly, secretly, sometimes painfully, over many years. The psyche does not announce its revolutions with trumpets. It whispers, it withdraws, it rearranges the inner furniture, and it waits for the moment when consciousness is finally fragile enough or courageous enough to listen, what you call collapse. I often call initiation, and what you call stagnation is frequently the final tightening of the cocoon before the wings press outward for the first time. When I speak of the shadow, I do not mean some monstrous creature lurking within you. Though it can feel that way to the untrained mind, the shadow is the part of you that has carried the emotions you denied, the desires you refused, the memories you buried, and the instincts you believed were unacceptable. It is the guardian of your unlived life, and therefore it is often the keeper of your power. Most individuals run from the shadow because they fear it will devour them, not realizing that the shadow is starving precisely because it has been denied a place at the table of consciousness. The moment you turn toward it with honesty is the moment the entire architecture of your inner life begins to change. Many of you have felt this in recent years, though you did not have the language for it. A restlessness that cannot be calmed, a dissatisfaction with roles that once gave you comfort, a silent rebellion against the emotional burdens you once carried automatically. These are not signs of failure. They are indicators that the inner world has begun preparing you for a comeback that will not resemble the outer victories you once fantasized about. Instead, this comeback is the reclamation of psychic territory, a return of vitality, a rerouting of your instinctual energy in soil that has long awaited your courage. I have seen countless individuals reach this threshold, and nearly all of them believed they were breaking down. But what breaks is not the soul. What breaks is the illusion that the ego has everything under control. The ego is a fragile construct, necessary but fragile. It believes it must orchestrate all transformation, forgetting that transformation is the domain of the unconscious. Your shadow has been arranging this moment with a precision the conscious mind could never manage. Even your failures have been curated. Your losses, too, were chosen by the deeper intelligence within you to strip away the identities that no longer serve the direction of your becoming. The psyche is far more purposeful than you imagine. When a person resists the path of individuation, the unconscious begins to push with increasing intensity, first through dreams, then through subtle emotional tides, then through crises that confront the ego with its own limitations. You may think you failed during these years, but failure is often a mask worn by a deeper necessity. The unconscious had to dismantle the version of you that was too small for what the future demanded. If you listen carefully, you may notice that the air around you, the psychic atmosphere has shifted. There is a certain density before a breakthrough, the way the sky darkens before a storm that cleanses the land. Your shadow has not been punishing you. It has been preparing you every time you avoided conflict. It stored the unspoken truth every time you swallowed your anger. It held the fire for you every time you dimmed your light to keep the peace. It guarded the brightness until you were strong enough to bear the consequences of shining. And now you feel the pressure of years of unlived life pressing against the walls of consciousness. This is why you feel uneasy. This is why you feel a strange combination of exhaustion and awakening. The shadow is stepping forward. I want you to imagine, if you will, a dream I once analyzed. A woman stood at the threshold of a dark forest. Behind her was a city made of glass, ordered, clean, secure, but fragile. In front of her lay the forest, thick with fog, filled with the unknown. She was terrified, but she also felt an undeniable pull. When she stepped into the forest, she discovered a wolf waiting for her, a creature she had feared all her life. And yet, as she approached it, she realized the wolf was wounded, limping, not dangerous, but abandoned. When she touched it, the wolf transformed into a radiant version of herself, stronger, clearer, more whole. She had feared her own strength for so long that she projected it outward onto a creature she believed would destroy her. This is the nature of the shadow. What you fear most in yourself is often what you need most. The shadow's power is intimidating because you have lived too long in a version of yourself built on compromise, politeness, appeasement, or self-denial. But the psyche does not tolerate imprisonment forever. Instincts revolt, the true self rebels, and there comes a moment when the shadow refuses to carry your burdens any longer. When this happens, life as you know it begins to melt, and the ego thinks all is lost. But in truth, the ego is simply being invited to grow. You feel this now, do you not? A sense that the old ways of being are no longer sustainable. A sense that you cannot return to who you were, even if some part of you longs for the familiarity of those patterns. But the psyche does not regress once it has glimpsed its own truth. The unconscious cannot unknow what it knows. Once the shadow awakens, it begins to demand integration. It wants dialogue. It wants your honesty. It wants your presence. It does not want to replace you. It wants to make you whole. But this process, this initiation, is not gentle. It requires confronting inner figures you have avoided, your inner critic, your abandoned child, your repressed instincts, your unexpressed grief. These figures are not visitors. They are residents. They have lived in the basements of your psyche for years, sometimes for decades, and now they are knocking at the door, insisting that you acknowledge them. If you open the door, even slightly, they will begin to transform, because consciousness is the most powerful solvent of psychic wounds. The shadow cannot remain monstrous in the presence of compassion. It begins to take shape. to reveal its wisdom, to guide you toward the life you were meant to live before fear persuaded you to shrink. Consider the patterns you have repeated, the psychological loops that felt inescapable. These patterns were not punishments. They were mirrors. The unconscious repeats what the ego refuses to learn. You may think you were stuck, but in truth you were circling the same wound because you had not yet descended into it. The unconscious does not release a lesson simply because the ego is tired. It releases the lesson only when the ego is humble enough to listen. And now, after years of agitation, confusion, emotional turbulence, or inner drought, something in you is listening. Something in you is ready. You might not feel ready, but readiness is rarely felt. It is enacted, and you have already begun to enact it by seeking understanding, by confronting truths you once avoided, by allowing yourself to feel emotions you once suppressed. Every tear, every moment of disillusionment, every quiet night when you questioned the purpose of your suffering, these were the rituals of initiation. Pain is the alchemy through which the unconscious refines you. Do not imagine that the unconscious works against you. It works for you. Even when its methods are harsh, the shadow is not your enemy. It is your neglected companion, your inner defender, your untamed vitality, and it is calling you now because the time for fragmentation has ended. You are meant to become an integrated whole, not a collection of fractured pieces pretending to be fine. This comeback, this psychological return, will not be loud at first. It will begin with subtle shifts. You will say no where you once said yes. You will walk away from dynamics that once mesmerized you. You will feel an instinctive clarity about people and environments that drain you. You will no longer tolerate emotional debts that you did not create, and gradually the self you abandoned long ago will begin to rise from beneath the rubble of old roles, old identities, and old expectations. Your shadow has been preparing you for this moment for years. It has orchestrated encounters that forced you to see your blind spots. It has generated dreams that exposed your suppressed desires. It has engineered emotional storms that dismantled illusions. And now, at last, you stand at the threshold of becoming. But before you cross it, you must understand one more truth. Your comeback is not a return to who you were. It is the emergence of who you were meant to be before the world persuaded you to betray yourself. And now we begin the descent. As we descend together into the deeper strata of your psyche, I want you to notice how the atmosphere begins to shift. The conscious mind prefers light, clarity, linearity, but the unconscious speaks in symbols, in images, in emotional tones that do not obey the logic of daylight. You are entering the inner landscape, where your shadow has been shaping the contours of your destiny without your awareness. Do not fear this descent. The downward path has always been the true path of transformation. The alchemists called it nigredo, the darkening phase, the necessary dissolution before any new form of life can emerge. What looks like psychological collapse is often the precondition for inner rebirth. You have felt this darkness in various ways over the years. sometimes through a numbness that made you question your purpose, sometimes through confusion so dense that you could not find the thread back to yourself, sometimes through relationships that broke you open, exposing wounds you believed were long gone. At other times, through a fatigue that no amount of rest could cure, because it was not the body but the psyche that was exhausted. These were not random misfortunes. They were orchestrations of the unconscious, each playing its part in preparing you for the moment when you would finally be able to confront what lies beneath. Let me offer you a dream from another patient, a man who arrived on the brink of despair, unable to understand why his life felt like a hollow performance. In his dream, he walked through an abandoned cathedral. The stained glass windows were shattered, their colors strewn across the floor like broken jewels. He felt grief, an overwhelming grief, because this cathedral represented his inner world, once vibrant, now in ruins. But as he walked deeper into the building, he noticed a faint glow behind a collapsed altar. When he cleared the rubble, he found a single candle, still burning, untouched by the destruction, and behind the candle, a locked door he had never seen before. When he opened it, he stepped into a hidden chamber filled with gold, manuscripts, ancient maps, treasures. He had never dared to imagine belonged to him. The dream revealed what he already suspected, but could not articulate. The destruction of his outer life was necessary to expose the inner treasures he had long neglected. This is the paradox of the shadow's preparation. It dismantles what you falsely believe you are, so it can reveal what you truly are. You, to have a hidden chamber, you, to have stored parts of yourself behind locked doors, your intuition, your instinct, your truth, your unlived passions, your suppressed anger, your forgotten hopes. The shadow has guarded these treasures because the ego was not yet mature enough to handle them responsibly, but now the ego has been humbled by experience, by disillusionment, by heartbreak, by the slow erosion of false identities. And this humility is the doorway through which the unconscious can finally speak. The ego resists this process. Of course, it prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar power. It is terrified of losing control. It clings to narratives that once protected you, even when those narratives have become chains. The ego says, I cannot let go, I cannot change, I cannot face what I have suppressed. But the shadow says, you must, and the unconscious, with its vast intelligence, begins to orchestrate the conditions that make surrender inevitable. Often this takes the form of synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that defy logic. People appear exactly when you are ready to confront a specific truth. A book falls from a shelf at the moment you need its message. A song triggers a forgotten memory. A sudden insight breaks through without warning, as if whispered by an unseen figure guiding you from within. These are not accidents. They are signals that the inner world is aligning the outer circumstances to facilitate your transformation. But let us speak plainly, the comeback you are approaching will not emerge from comfort. It will emerge from the confrontation with the very forces within you that you have avoided. The shadow is not a place you visit. It is a presence you integrate. It is the part of you that carries all the emotional energy you refuse to feel. The psyche does not bury emotions to punish you. It buries them to protect you until you are strong enough to retrieve them. Now you are strong enough. Consider the anger you have suppressed, the times you swallowed your truth to avoid conflict, the moments you allowed others to cross your boundaries, the years you endured situations that drained your vitality. That anger has not disappeared. It has fermented, becoming a potent psychic force. When integrated, anger becomes clarity, direction, instinct. But when denied, anger becomes anxiety, resentment, self-betrayal. The shadow has held this anger for you, waiting for the moment when it could be returned to you in its purified form, not as destruction, but as inner authority. Or think of your grief, the grief you never fully expressed because you believed you had to be strong. This grief settled in the depths of your psyche like sediment, shaping your emotional landscape in ways you did not understand. When grief is ignored, it becomes resignation. But when grief is honored, it becomes wisdom. Your shadow has collected all your unwept tears, all your unspoken goodbyes, and it now offers them back to you so that your comeback may be rooted in truth, not avoidance. And then there is your fear, not the superficial anxieties that flutter in the mind, but the existential fear that asks whether you are enough, whether you are lovable, whether you are capable of living a life that reflects your deepest self. This fear has shaped your choices, your relationships, your self-perception. But fear, too, has a sacred purpose. It reveals the places within you that are still waiting to be integrated. Your shadow has carried this fear tenderly, almost protectively, because within that fear lies your courage, raw, unpolished, but real. Everything that has overwhelmed you in recent years, the confusion, the emotional storms, the disorientation, was part of the shadow's preparation. Like a sculptor removing excess stone, your unconscious has been chiseling away at everything that is not essential to your true nature. You may believe you have been losing pieces of yourself, but in reality, you have been losing only the masks. I have watched many individuals reach this phase. It feels like a psychological winter cold, barren, empty. But winter is not the death of the seed. It is its protection. Underneath the frozen soil, something is forming, gathering strength, waiting for the temperature of consciousness to rise. Your shadow has been preparing the seed of your individuation through every trial you endured. You may look back on your life and see mistakes, but the unconscious sees raw material. You may see lost years, but the unconscious sees maturation. You may see patterns you could not break, but the unconscious sees the exact conditions necessary for the awakening of your deeper self. Nothing was wasted, nothing was meaningless. The psyche is efficient, it uses everything. At this stage, the most dangerous temptation is to rush, to force clarity, to demand answers. But the unconscious unfolds according to its own rhythm. The shadow reveals its treasures only when the ego has softened. When the inner air becomes still enough for truth to surface, this stillness is not passivity, it is receptivity. It is the willingness to let the deeper intelligence within you take the lead. You may feel an inner tension, rising a sense that something wants to break through. This is the first sign of the comeback your shadow has been preparing. The energy you once used to maintain false identities is being reclaimed. The energy you used to survive is being redirected toward living. The energy you used to protect your wounds is being withdrawn because the wounds themselves are ready to be healed. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin to recognize the patterns in your life not as curses, but as teachings. You begin to see the people who wounded you not as villains, but as catalysts. You begin to understand why you were drawn to certain experiences, why certain losses were necessary, why the life you tried so hard to maintain eventually collapsed. This is the illumination that follows the descent. The shadow does not only reveal what you suppressed, it also reveals the meaning behind your suffering. Once meaning appears, transformation becomes inevitable. You will notice subtle changes in your perception. Colors may appear more vivid, conversations may feel more honest. Your intuition will sharpen, you will sense when something aligns with your truth, and when it does not, you will no longer tolerate environments that suffocate your authenticity. This is the beginning of psychic sovereignty, the return of your inner authority. And as this authority grows, the ego undergoes a metamorphosis. It stops trying to dominate the psyche and instead becomes the servant of a higher intelligence. This is the ego's rightful role. When the ego submits to the self, life becomes guided, not forced. Synchronicities multiply, dreams intensify, creativity expands, relationships deepen, choices become clearer. You begin to live from the center, not from fear. This is the comeback, not a return to your old self, but the release of the self you abandoned long ago. You may feel it now, a stirring beneath your ribs, a warmth behind the sternum, a quiet certainty that something within you is waking up. This waking is the work of the shadow, which has guarded your forgotten power for years, waiting for the moment when you were strong enough to reclaim it. And now the moment arrives. As we continue deeper, I want you to understand something essential. The comeback your shadow has been preparing is not merely a psychological event, it is a metaphysical turning, a reorientation of your entire being toward the center from which your true life flows. The unconscious does not labor for years simply to return you to the surface where you once drifted. It prepares you for a more authentic existence, one rooted in your individuality, in your inner authority, in your fundamental truth. And truth, when recovered, radiates outward with a force that both creates and destroys. You cannot reclaim your inner life without shedding parts of your outer life. This shedding is not cruelty. It is necessary adjustment. The life you lived up to this point was built on the compromises of survival. You adapted to others' expectations. You shaped yourself around their needs. You dimmed your instincts to avoid conflict. You developed defenses that were necessary when you were not strong enough to live from your true center. All of this was understandable, but as the psyche matures, it begins to revolt against false living. Anxiety rises, depression whispers, emotional exhaustion accumulates, the soul becomes restless. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something in you can no longer endure in authenticity. The shadow, sensing this readiness, long before your conscious mind does, begins to destabilize your old identity. It weakens your attachment to roles you have outgrown. It magnifies the discomfort you feel around situations that no longer serve you. It makes you intolerant of superficiality. This is why you often feel alone during such a phase. The people who once understood the old version of you cannot understand the new one you are becoming, because they were bonded not to your essence, but to the mask you wore. Do not mistake this loneliness for abandonment. It is a sacred solitude curated by the unconscious, so that you may hear the voice of your deeper self without interference. If you had remained surrounded by noise, social, emotional, psychological, you would have missed the faint stirrings of the truth rising from within. Isolation is often the womb of transformation. Let me illustrate this with a dream from another individual, a deeply sensitive woman who carried the wounds of her past silently. In her dream, she wandered through a vast desert, parched, sunburned, disoriented. She believed she would die there, but suddenly she saw a figure in the distance, a dark silhouette, standing still as a monolith. As she approached, she realized the figure was herself, but older, wiser, cloaked in shadows. This other self did not speak. It simply looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. Then, without warning, it melted into the sand. When she touched the sand, water began to spring forth, turning into a river that flowed beneath her feet, guiding her out of the desert. The dream revealed the truth she had always sensed, but feared to confront the version of herself she most feared. Meeting the shadow self was also the one that held the key to her liberation. And by touching the place where that figure dissolved, she activated a hidden source of life within her. Your shadow plays a similar role. It stands at the edges of your consciousness, waiting for the moment when you are ready to face it. When you finally approach it, something remarkable happens. The shadow dissolves into the raw material of your transformation, and the despair you feared becomes the river that carries you forward. There comes a moment in every psychological journey when the shadow steps aside, and in its place emerges the self, the inner center, the true authority, the architect of your destiny. But the self cannot appear until the shadow has been acknowledged, integrated, and given its rightful place in the psyche. This is why you have gone through these difficult years. Your shadow was not punishing you. It was readying you for the arrival of something far greater. And now, this deeper force is beginning to rise. You may sense it as a subtle clarity that was not available before. You may feel a loosening of fear, a strengthening of intuition, a growing distance from the patterns that once imprisoned you. These sensations are signs that the self is stepping into the foreground. The unconscious does not announce this shift with fanfare. It emerges quietly, like dawn spreading across a dark horizon, insisting not through force but through undeniability. Once this emergence begins, you will notice profound changes in the way you relate to your life. You will no longer seek validation from sources that once held power over you. You will no longer tolerate relationships that drain your vitality. You will no longer confuse attachment with love. You will feel an instinctual sense of direction, as if your inner compass has been recalibrated. This is the moment when psyche and soul begin to align. But before this alignment stabilizes, the psyche demands one final task: the retrieval of the parts of yourself you abandoned. You know exactly which parts, the younger selves you silenced to survive, the instincts you suppressed to gain acceptance, the emotions you buried because expressing them felt unsafe. These abandoned fragments do not disappear. They wait. They wait in the shadow until the adult self becomes strong enough to retrieve them. You may feel them now: childhood fears resurfacing, teenage longings echoing through your dreams, old memories rising with new urgency. These are not regressions, they are integrations. You are not going backward. You are gathering the pieces needed to go forward in wholeness. The process is often emotional. You may cry for reasons you cannot explain. You may feel anger at events long past. You may grieve for the life you could not live earlier. These emotions are not obstacles, they are gateways. Each emotion carries a story, and each story carries a part of your soul that is ready to come home. When these pieces return, something extraordinary occurs. Your energy increases. You begin to feel more alive, more grounded, more present. This is because fragmentation drains vitality, while integration restores it. The psyche is designed to be whole. The shadow keeps what the conscious self rejects, and when those rejected parts return, they bring with them a tremendous amount of psychic energy. This return of energy is the engine of your comeback. People often assume that transformation begins with action, but in truth, transformation begins with inner reorganization. Once the psyche has reorganized itself, action becomes effortless. Your instincts sharpen. Your intuition becomes more reliable. You begin to act from an inner knowing rather than from fear or obligation. At this stage, synchronicities intensify. You meet people who mirror your new state of consciousness. Opportunities align without force. Patterns that once repeated themselves dissolve. The world begins to respond to your inner alignment with outer clarity. You feel guided, not by external advice, but by an internal voice that feels ancient, wise, and unmistakably your own. This inner voice is not the ego, it is the self, speaking through your intuition, dreams, and subtle impulses. The self does not shout, it nudges, it suggests, it leads gently but firmly. When you follow it, your life begins to unfold with a sense of inevitability, as if you are finally living the path that was always yours. But let us speak of the deeper truth behind this. Your shadow has been preparing this emergence for years by dismantling everything that stood in the way, every relationship that collapsed, every identity that felt too small, every disappointment that crushed your illusions. These were not failures, they were excavations. The shadow was clearing the inner ground so that the self could rise. Consider for a moment how much energy you invested in maintaining roles that did not reflect your true nature. Consider the emotional labor required to silence your instincts, to ignore your intuition, to accommodate others' expectations. The collapse of these roles was not punishment, it was liberation. The unconscious, in its ruthless wisdom, refused to let you remain imprisoned in a life that was too small for your soul. What remains now is the final integration, the reconciliation between the person you thought you had to be and the person you truly are. This reconciliation begins with acceptance, not passive acceptance, but active recognition of your inner reality. When you finally see yourself without distortion, without judgment, without fear, you step into the power that has been waiting for you. And it is here, in this inner clarity, that the true comeback begins, not with noise, not with grand gestures, but with a quiet inner shift that changes everything. You will feel it as a subtle but unmistakable alignment. The world will not look different, but you will inhabit your life with a new presence, a new authority, a new depth. This inner presence is what others perceive as strength, though they cannot explain why. It is the magnetism of an integrated psyche. Your shadow, having completed its work of preparation, begins to withdraw, not because it is disappearing, but because it has been integrated. What once felt like an enemy becomes an ally. What once felt like darkness becomes a source of insight. What once felt threatening becomes a reservoir of strength. And now, as you stand on the threshold of this transformation, you may sense a truth rising within you, quiet, ancient, unyielding. You are returning to yourself. As we approach the final stage of this journey, I want you to feel the subtle, almost reverent shift occurring in your inner landscape. Something within you, something old, something primal, something wiser than your conscious mind has begun to rise, with the quiet authority of dawn breaking over a long dark horizon. What you are experiencing is not simply psychological insight, it is the emergence of the self, the central organizing principle of the psyche, the source from which all authentic transformation flows, Your shadow has been preparing the ground for this emergence through every trial, every loss, every disorientation, every inner collapse you have endured. And now, at last, the soil is ready. To understand this moment fully, you must see the shadow not as an antagonist, but as a loyal guardian. For years, it carried the emotions you could not bear, the truths you were not ready to face, the instincts you believed were dangerous, the parts of yourself that would have shattered your identity had they surfaced prematurely. It bore these burdens with a discipline the conscious mind rarely thanks it for. And only now, when your ego has softened through suffering and become strong through self-awareness, do you receive what the shadow has been keeping for you? The unconscious is patient. It does not reveal a treasure before its time. It waits until the vessel of consciousness is large enough, stable enough, honest enough to hold it without breaking. That time is now. But the arrival of the self is not a moment of fireworks or divine spectacle. It is often subtle, a quiet certainty, a sense of inner rootedness, a clarity that no longer depends on external validation. You begin to feel an inner gravity, as if the center of your being has shifted downward, grounding you, anchoring you, aligning you with something immovable. This groundedness is not calmness as the ego understands it. It is the deep, instinctive knowing that you can endure whatever life brings because you are no longer divided. For the divided self is always fragile, but the integrated self possesses a resilience that borders on the mystical. Let us imagine for a moment another dream, one that symbolizes the culmination of this process. A man finds himself standing before a vast mountain. He has climbed smaller hills before, but this mountain is unlike anything he has encountered. It is tall, ancient, imposing. At first he feels intimidated, believing he must reach the summit to prove something. But then, as he begins the ascent, he realizes that the mountain is not a challenge to conquer, but a mirror of his own inner elevation. Halfway up, he enters a narrow pass where a shadowed figure blocks his path. This figure is not threatening. It looks tired, burdened, worn by years of waiting. When the man approaches, he recognizes the figure as himself, the version he created long ago to protect himself from pain. This version is smaller, hunched, clutching a heavy satchel filled with stones. Each stone is labeled rejection, shame, fear, betrayal, abandonment, guilt. The man kneels beside his shadow self. He does not push it aside. He does not destroy it. He simply shares breath with it, acknowledging its service, and then, with gentle hands, he begins removing the stones from the satchel. As each stone is lifted, the shadow self grows lighter, straighter, taller, until finally it rises to its full height, equal to him. The two selves merge, and the mountain, once imposing, now unfolds into a luminous path that guides him upward with ease. This dream captures the essence of what you are experiencing. Your comeback is not the elimination of your shadow, it is your reunion with it. It is the marriage of the conscious and unconscious aspects of your psyche. The sacred union the alchemists called conjunctio. The final stage of inner transformation. When this union occurs, your life begins to reorganize itself around a new center. The decisions you make, the relationships you invest in, the habits you cultivate, the boundaries you set all, become expressions of your integrated self. You no longer act from fear or compensation. You act from alignment, and alignment has a power that effort cannot replicate. People will notice the shift, though they may not understand it. They will sense your presence, your groundedness, your clarity, your refusal to betray yourself. They may project onto you as they always have, but now you will not be shaken by their projections. When you were fragmented, projection cut deeply because it touched wounded places, but when you are integrated, projection passes over you like shadows over a mountain visible. But without power, this is what it means to experience the comeback your shadow has been preparing, not a return to an old version of yourself, but the emergence of someone you have never fully allowed yourself to be. Let us explore how this emergence transforms your relationship to the world. First, your intuition sharpens. You begin to perceive the psychological undercurrents in conversations, the emotional truth behind people's words, the instincts that guide you reliably. This heightened intuition is not magical. It is the result of having access to the unconscious content you formerly suppressed. You see more because you are more. Second, your boundaries strengthen naturally. You do not force them. You do not defend them with fear. They arise from your clarity about who you are and what you will no longer permit into your psyche. People who relied on your softness may be unsettled by this. They will say, you have changed, and they will be right. But the change is simply that you have stopped abandoning yourself. Third, your creativity expands. Not creativity as artistic ability, though that may also awaken, but creativity as the psychological power to respond to life in ways that are original, instinctive, and meaningful. You stop living by habit and begin living by imagination. You see possibilities where you once saw limitations. Fourth, your relationships undergo purification. Some fall away because they were built on your wounds and not your essence. Others deepen because they were waiting for your truth to emerge. The integrated self does not cling. It draws near those who resonate with its frequency and releases those who do not. Fifth, your suffering transforms from something that crushes you into something that instructs you. When the unconscious becomes conscious, pain does not disappear, but it changes in quality. It becomes purposeful. You understand its meaning, and meaning is the antidote to despair. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, you begin to trust yourself, not in the superficial sense of confidence, but in the existential sense of knowing that your inner world is trustworthy. You trust your instincts, you trust your perceptions, you trust the movements of your soul, you trust that the unconscious is not an enemy but an ally. This trust changes everything. It changes the way you work. because you no longer force yourself into roles that suffocate your spirit. It changes the way you love, because you no longer abandon yourself to keep the peace. It changes the way you dream, because you no longer shrink from your potential. It changes the way you confront challenges, because you no longer collapse into helplessness. You move differently in the world, slower, more intentional, more grounded, more connected to the deeper rhythms of your psyche. You begin to experience your life as something you co-create with the unconscious, not something that happens to you. This is the essence of individuation, the collaboration between the conscious ego and the unconscious self. When these two forces work together, your life becomes a living dialogue between your inner and outer worlds. Each event, each relationship, each challenge becomes a message. Everything becomes symbolic. You live not only in the literal world, but in the mythic dimension of your own psyche. This mythic dimension is where true power resides. For years, the ego struggled to control life through logic, planning, avoidance, or willpower. But logic alone cannot reveal meaning. Planning alone cannot reveal purpose. Avoidance cannot reveal truth. And willpower cannot reveal destiny. Only the interplay between consciousness and the unconscious can reveal the full tapestry of your life. Your shadow knew this long before you did. That is why it dismantled your illusions, why it disrupted your patterns, why it forced you into confrontations you wished to avoid. It guided you through darkness not to punish you, but to prepare you. And because you endured, because you listened, because you allowed your old self to die, you now stand before a threshold that few people ever reach. The threshold where you stop surviving yourself and begin inhabiting yourself. The threshold where you stop running from your depths and begin drawing power from them. The threshold where you stop fearing who you are and begin becoming who you were destined to be. This is your comeback, not the triumphant performance the ego once fantasized about, but the quiet, irrevocable awakening of your inner life, the return of vitality, the restoration of instinct, the deep remembering of your own psychological sovereignty. And from this sovereignty, a new life emerges. Not a perfect life, but an aligned one. Not a painless life, but a meaningful one. Not a life free of challenges, but a life in which challenges become doorways. The unconscious, after years of shaping you, now opens the path before you. It will not walk the path for you, but it will walk beside you. The shadow will no longer sabotage you. It will inform you. The self will no longer hide from you. It will guide you. You are no longer divided. The long preparation is complete. You are about to experience the comeback your shadow has been preparing for years. And now, finally, you are ready.